It was a Wednesday evening. It was cold that day because the Harmattan wind blew heavily strange that day, like it was carrying a warning. The palace was unusually still, yet outside the city hummed with hope. Markets bustled, children chanted his name in dusty schoolyards. Women in headscarves sold mangoes under the sun, whispering prayers for the young lion of Faso, for Ibrahim Traore. Inside the presidential residence, dinner was being prepared. The cook, a man named Kader Bako, who had served 2 regimes before, moved with robotic precision. His hands, weathered in calm, diced onions, stirred sauces, and finally placed a bowl of steaming stew on the tray, meant for the president's quarters. To any other man, it looked like an ordinary meal. But death wore the mask of familiarity. Kader had once been praised for his loyalty. The kind of man who knew every spice the president liked, the exact heat of his tea, the rhythm of his schedule. But loyalty in a world of shadows and shifting powers is a currency often bought and sold. They came to him weeks earlier, faceless men in dark vehicles with white envelopes and colder smiles. "It's just a small adjustment," they said. "One less meal, one more future." The envelope was thick. Kader's hands trembled when he opened it, not because of fear, but because he remembered the price of saying no. So he said yes. Ibrahim was reading at his desk, a biography of Sankara open beside blueprints for new solar projects. His dog, Kanto, a large moss-coated shepherd with a gaze too knowing for an animal, lay curled by the window, eyes tracking every movement. The tray arrived as it always did. A quiet knock, a polite nod, a bow, routine. That's what they counted on. Routine. Traore barely looked up as the plate was set down. He muttered a thank you, reached for his fork, and that's when Kanto moved. At first it was just a growl, low, deep. Then he stood, fur bristling, tail stiff like a spear. Ibrahim froze. "Kanto," he said, half amused. "It's just dinner." But Kanto didn't blink. He lunged. In one swift motion, the dog knocked the plate to the floor. The porcelain shattered, stew splattering across the polished wood. Ibrahim jumped up, heart pounding, confusion written across his face. The dog circled the mess, sniffed once, then backed away, growling louder. That was the moment Ibrahim knew something was wrong. They tested the food within the hour. Cyanide, enough to kill a dozen men. And the cook? Gone. Disappeared into the night like smoke. Uniform folded neatly on his bed, ID badge left behind. The security footage showed nothing. Cameras had glitched. Files were wiped. A ghost. That's all he became. But Kanto had seen something, sensed it, smelled it. That night, Ibrahim sat in silence, watching his dog with new eyes. He thought about loyalty, the kind that cannot be bought, bribed, or broken. He remembered his mother's old words. In a world full of men wearing masks, sometimes the only truth left lives in animals. And outside, the Harmattan howled again. But this time, it sounded less like wind and more like a warning left unfinished. The next morning, the sun rose over Ouagadougou like nothing had happened. Golden, warm, indifferent. The streets bustled, the radio hosts laughed, and in the markets, vendors sang. But inside the presidential walls, something had shifted. Traore didn't sleep that night. He sat cross-legged on the floor beside Kanto, the loyal beast curled at his feet, eyes still alert, ears twitching at every creak in the walls. There was no peace in power, only vigilance. That night, Traore learned the bitter truth every revolutionary must one day face. The real enemy is not always outside the gates. Sometimes it sleeps within your walls, smiling, serving, waiting. By dawn, the palace staff was under quiet lockdown. No alarms, no guns, just calm questions, quiet movements, and Kanto's nose sniffing each corridor like a general leading his army. Traore didn't speak much. His mind was elsewhere, connecting dots, recalling faces, conversations, the odd look the cook gave last Tuesday, the way the tray always arrived 2 minutes early. And then it came back to him, the file they intercepted 2 weeks ago, a classified communique from a Western intelligence group. It mentioned Operation Stallion. The document was vague, heavily redacted, but one phrase stood out in bold: decapitate the momentum. Use internal assets. No martyrs. No martyrs. They didn't want a bullet. They didn't want chaos. They wanted it quiet, clean, forgotten. That's when it hit him. This wasn't just about poisoning a man. This was about assassinating an idea without leaving blood. Because if Ibrahim Traore died of illness, who would chant his name in the streets? Who would raise fists in Bamako, whisper hope in Cotonou? If he fell not as a lion, but as a victim of fate, the fire would die with him. And that's why they sent the cook. But they didn't count on the dog. Traore stood by the window overlooking the city. The morning call to prayer echoed faintly in the distance. He tightened his fists. "They think I am alone," he muttered. "But every child in the street, every farmer with cracked hands, every elder who still remembers the sound of colonial boots, they are watching. They are with me." He turned to Kanto, who now sat still, waiting. "We name buildings after our heroes," he said, voice steady. "But I think I'll name a revolution after you." Just then, his chief of security entered, face pale. "Sir," he whispered, "we've found something. The cook. He wasn't just anyone." Traore raised an eyebrow. "He was trained in Europe. Former military chef. Discharged quietly 5 years ago. No trace since, until he appeared here a year ago." The puzzle was no longer a mystery. It was a message, a declaration from the shadows. You are rising too fast. But they forgot one thing. When you chase a lion, you better kill it, because if it survives, it learns. It grows sharper, and it never forgets your scent. And as Traore stared into the morning light, something else stirred in his eyes. A new plan, because they had tried to kill him with silence. Now, he would answer with thunder. And if they thought the lion roared before, they hadn't heard him with his teeth bared. Now let me ask you this. If a revolution is powerful enough to make even dogs sense danger, what do you think it will do to men who have lost their fear? The silence after that morning was not peace. It was tension stretched thin across the sky like a drumskin, waiting for the next strike. Traore ordered no arrests, no public outcry, no breaking news. Let them think they still held the upper hand. Let the handlers in faraway embassies sit comfortably behind their tinted windows, sipping coffee and whispering. He never found out, but he had. And he was watching them now as they had watched him. The cook was gone, vanished before security could close the net. 1 minute in the holding room, the next, gone. No sign of forced escape, no footage, no trace, as if he had been erased by the very people who sent him. A ghost returned to the mist. Traore stood by the files late that night, each dossier laid bare on the table like a battlefield. There were names, connections, patterns, men in suits who smiled too often, NGOs that came bearing schools but stayed to consult, advisors who never advised, only listened, reported, disappeared. He began marking them one by one, and as the ink circled the names, the real picture formed. Not just of infiltration, but of orchestration. A spiderweb spun decades before he was born, stretching from Sahel to Senegal, from boardrooms in Brussels to cafes in Abidjan. And deep within the web, he saw it, a new kind of war. This wasn't the Africa of tanks and coups anymore. This was the age of velvet chains. Loans disguised as lifelines, partnerships that felt like prisons, aid that never came without a collar. The empire no longer needed soldiers. It sent economists, strategists, smiling men with golden pens. But he wasn't playing their game anymore. That night, Traore issued a single secret order. Not to attack, not to arrest, to watch, to listen, to let the trap close. Not on him, but on them. He wanted to know how deep the rot went, who whispered in whose ear, who shook hands with whose ghost, and more importantly, who in his own circle had already sold their silence for silver. Kanto never left his side now. The dog paced the halls before him, waited by his door at night, watched every plate, every cup. The soldiers, once indifferent to the animal, now saluted it with a strange reverence. They had seen what it did. They knew. But there was something new in the air, a shift. Even among his men, there were glances, some of loyalty, some of unease. Because when a man survives an invisible death, he becomes something more than flesh. He becomes myth, and myths make men nervous. But myths also do something else. They inspire. And far beyond the palace walls, the whispers grew louder. On dusty buses, in crowded classrooms, in tea shops and internet cafes, people spoke of the poison that never killed him, of the dog that sensed what men could not, of the lion who refused to fall. They didn't need to know the details. Myths didn't need facts. They needed symbols. And Ibrahim Traore had just become one. But the empire was not done. If poison failed, they would try seduction next. And that would be the most dangerous weapon of all, because even the strongest lions are still human. Now ask yourself, what does a man do when the next assassin doesn't come with a knife? None but with a smile? And just like that, the tides turned. The poison didn't work, the coup didn't land, the propaganda didn't stick, and the fear they tried to sow, it only watered the seeds of rebellion. Ibrahim Traore stood taller than ever, not just because he survived, but because he never changed. Because through every plot, every betrayal, every offer dressed in velvet chains, he stayed loyal to one thing, his people, and the world started to see it. Africa, once spoken for, now had a voice, and that voice sounded like thunder rolling across the Sahel. He taught us that you can be young and unshaken, that you can lead with clean hands in a world built by dirty ones, that even when the wolves circle, the lion doesn't flinch. Now the question isn't how he survived. The real question is, who sent the cook? Who funds the chaos? Why are they so afraid of a free Africa? And what are they planning next? Your move, Africa. Let me hear what you think in the comments.